On today's episode, I spoke with Drew Brucker about startup marketing and growing LASSO's ARR by 11x in just 24 months. He actually helped reverse engineer some of the things that he did to grow Lasso and also chatted a little bit about AI. So let's dive right into this episode. If you wouldn't mind just kind of walking through a brief overview of what your careers looked like, the different roles you've been in, and kind of where you are now, where you've ended up on what you really like doing, what you really care about in marketing.
It's really interesting because I don't think my story is uncommon in the sense that like a lot of us have non-traditional or non-linear pathways to where we are. And for me specifically, like I take a lot of pride in development, continuing to learn, continuing to challenge my perspectives, lean into the things that I'm passionate about. So those things have changed over time, right? I mean, we're different people now than we were 5, 10 years ago. I started my career in sports actually on the sales side. So I worked for the St. Louis Cardinals in their front office. I did account, ticket sales, group ticket sales, and then sort of, you know, ventured outside of sports in the sales realm. Didn't really have a lot of great first sales jobs. Looking back at some of the opportunities that exist now, and the SaaS space, a lot of that wasn't really developed at that time, and so my idea of what sales was and those opportunities that existed, given the technology that was available, they're totally different roles. I worked for example, AT&T doing cold calling ad sales out of the yellow pages, right? Like boiler room type stuff, things that just aren't sexy. And so a lot of my sales career um, was that I had success with it, but it never really spoke to me in that way. And it ultimately resulted in me taking a step back in terms of the comp that I was making to find a sales role that felt more like me. And what that looked like was diving into property management, leasing apartments, right? And I started there. It wasn't sexy. I didn't make a lot of money, but I thought, hey, look, like the opportunity to connect with people face to face, right? To build rapport and relationships in person. I feel like this is more my speed. So once I did that, I really like found my groove in terms of the strengths that I could offer, the way that I would sell, and spent quite a bit of time with the same company, 3 years, built a really good reputation there because I was also really young. And at that age, right, this was sort of the digital transformation and the social media transformation. And I leaned into that and I was training some of the teams internally at our company there. I was doing marketing and thinking about marketing a little bit differently than everybody else in the traditional side. And I just got to a point where I had done so well at the company, I kind of hit that ceiling. I was just wondering what's next. And I basically pivoted into a marketing role within the property management space at the executive and regional level. So I was working with all the area vice presidents, the C suites of the company, and basically handling marketing initiatives for our entire portfolio across the nation. So I think it was maybe 120 or 150 different communities spread out across the nation. I would talk about things that, look, I experienced firsthand as somebody that had sold these apartments, and then also put on a marketing hat and think about, hey, how could I drive more traffic through the door or increase our perception or our sentiment. And I didn't know anything about marketing at that time. I just had somebody that took a chance on me. I had a really great boss and allowed me to learn. And um, it was there that I really found my curiosity, my passion, and that was in marketing. And I spent some time there. I rose really quickly in that company. I pivoted over to the tech startup space, also kind of parallel to property management, and that was how I made that leap into tech. And then from there, I ventured outside of property management into just, the startup scene in general, in B2B in a number of different niches. And, yeah, I've just loved it ever since. And so I've primarily worked on small startup teams, usually 5 or 6 marketers at the most, early stage for the most part. I have done a little bit of later stage. And, yeah, I just love the challenge that comes with building and feeling the impact tangibly, right? Like I like that and not having a lot of the obstacles or red tape or, political jockeying that occurs when you get to a certain level. So that allowed me to really take advantage of my creativity, my curiosity and imagination in terms of like what we're trying to build and what we're trying to do.
So one experience in particular at Lasso, you grew Lasso over the course of 2020 or 24 months by about 11 times roughly. Let me know if that number is correct. But in that experience, I'm curious, going back to the very beginning of it, what marketing looked like at the company then versus what it
Yeah.
looked like kind of near the end. In other words, like take me through the before after bridge of your time at Lasso.
Yeah. In order to do this justice, I need to give you a little bit of detail on Lasso. So Lasso is a vertical SaaS company in the live event production space. So I took that job in April of 2021. Um, and when I took that job, right, COVID was still happening, right? Like there were still residuals of what was happening. And we all know that live events completely shut down during COVID. So there was already a little bit of risk in my mind of like, hey, like I'm making this jump. Is this going to be a safe place to jump? Number one. Two, when I got there, I also learned, right, like that the existing marketing team that had been there had left when COVID sort of initially happened. It was just a very skeleton crew, like it was one or two people. It had never scaled up, right? Because it was a Series A company. And so it got put on pause. Those people left. When I showed up, marketing hadn't been touched in a year, right? So it's basically like starting from scratch. Anything that you had at that time is probably outdated. I showed up, right? Like looking at the branding, the things that we have, the offering, the messaging, the position that we have, it all needed to be reworked. And I looked at that from a couple of different angles, not only just from my individual experience of what that meant, but also like talking to customers, getting some of the quantitative and qualitative sentiment and factoring that in and saying, like, look, we have a lot of work to do here. um, so yeah, I mean, the early days of that were myself, right? Like leading that team. I had two other people that I hired with me, trying to understand a niche industry, right? Which takes some time, trying to understand the people within the company, which takes time. And then trying to lead those people that you hired without a lot of context yourself within the space. So there were immediate challenges, right? Like I'm not going to say those first 6 months were easy by any means. It was a lot of work. Um, and I think it was just one of those things where you had to dive in and really get some objective data to work with, right? Like really understand and audit what you have in front of you. And so once I was able to do that, um, I think that's where things changed, right? Like we didn't have any content at the time. So I had to find somebody that could create content. And I've got a content background, but I've always been big on scaling content, using internal SMEs. Like from my first time, in SaaS, that was one of the first things I learned and discovered was the fastest way to create content is to get with these SMEs. Don't try to like learn all of the lingo overnight, right? I'm going to go straight to the source and find a way to use that as my content, right? There's no reason for me to hire somebody outside the space, get them coached up, ramped up, and then try to facilitate that back. And so what we did, like one of the first things we did was start to lean into that, scale that out. There were a number of ways that we did that, right? Like through video. So we did a podcast, which is not uncommon now, right? But like at that time, that was still sort of like a newer thing. I didn't know much about it, but I thought about it from the lens of it doesn't matter if we have a single subscriber to this. It's still the best lever we can pull to create content at scale from our founder, right? And our founder's been in the space for a long time and knows all the intricacies, all the nuances. So if we can do a podcast, talk about the things that we know based on education or sentiment or surveys that we've gotten and feed that out into the space, then we're going to have plenty of use cases for this. And so that was method number one, right? Like it was with the podcast as an anchor and then splitting it and multi-purposing it and repurposing it into different channels that we were leveraging. And then, the other part of that was really like leaning into the internal SMEs from a video standpoint. So, what we discovered over time is we wanted to bring out the human element of the people working at the company. So the head of marketing, the head of sales, CS, some of our CS people, support people, product, our founders, like let's come to the table with some very specific and various questions for them, record it all, right? And then outsource that work to get split up into all these clips, right? So we can answer the questions of like, hey, what do we want? our prospects or our customers to know that we're working on right? Or like, what are the biggest challenges that we see, right? Or like, we wanted to really lay down that bridge because no one else was doing it. And so that allowed us to scale, right? Because if we had 10 SMEs and we had 10 questions and we split those up into individual questions and they're all in video, right? You've got 100 pieces of content you can work with just right there, right? And that's just at a general level, let alone the different channels that you can extend those to. So there were things like that where you can really punch above your weight class and look bigger than you are just by being a little bit more methodical and strategic about the way you're doing content. So we leaned heavily into the content side, and then it was really just about the brand and the positioning because, um, as with a lot of companies, right? Like especially early on, you start to develop more and more within the product, and you feel like you're compelled to say all these things about the product. But at the end of the day, it's like simplifying the complex. What are the 1 to 3 things that you want these people to walk away with if they visit your site and focus on that? Right. So then it became a whole thing of brand positioning, exercises, right? Like UX on the website. How do we want this experience to be in order to drive the revenue? So that's just sort of like a high level view, maybe some tactical advice in there or what worked for us. But I mean, it wasn't any one thing. It was just trying to think smarter with the resources that we had. And that was a smaller budget and a smaller team that was moving fast.
What what was the connective tissue between content and sales? Because I know that that's a big thing that many companies still struggle with is, okay, well, I know content's good. Most companies know that at this point, whether they're doing a video podcast first or a blog first, they have their preferences, but we know content's good. The question is always, how do we translate that into something below that, beneath that in the funnel? How do you think about that connective tissue between content and sales, or what does the funnel look like, or what did it look like for Lasso?
Yeah. I mean, like there's not an answer here that's going to surprise anybody. It's just you really have to think more like a single team than two teams, and I think that comes down to making sure that communication is solid, it's consistent, you're transparent, and people can kind of put their egos aside and really think about what's in the best interest of your potential customer, your current customers. And so what that looked like for us at Lasso was we only had one salesperson and we had 3 or 4 marketers. So the marketers were sort of already there. The salesperson that we had been there for a while, 3 or 4 years. She was there at that time, but she was a great source of knowledge. And so we did leverage her. Right. But I think we were also able to kind of get a head start on some of the things that us as marketers knew and then layer that in as we became more of a sales motion. Right. So we ended up hiring a VP of sales, adding SDRs, yada yada. And so when that happened, we had already established a really good communication structure, a consistency, a cadence with the AE that was there. We had pretty good insights. We could layer those things in, and then after that, it's just layering those other those other, I guess, connective pieces in. What are the things that sales gold on? What are the KPIs that they're gold on? Do they know what we're weighed against? And trying to assess, I guess, some of the higher priority needs that they have. Like some of the harder parts about that are when sales thinks they need something, right? And marketing's like, well, I don't know, do you? Are you going to use it? So I think like you guys, all everybody on the team has to be aligned in the sense of, hey, look, there are a million things we could do, but what are the few things that we actually should? And here's why we're doing it. And not necessarily the output, but like you and I were talking about before we jumped on this, the outcome, right? So you lead with the outcome that you're trying to get, then you move to the output that's going to get you there.
One last question around Lasso, and then I want to chat AI just for a minute. But at Lasso, now looking back at that experience, or maybe even across the other experiences you've had, if you could go back and shortcut anything, or do anything differently, do anything better, what would that be?
Oh, man. I don't know if it's at Lasso, but up until I think the role before Lasso, as a marketer, and just given the way technology was and the ability to, I guess, communicate and network with what other people are seeing and doing, you were almost confined to the people that already were there at the company or the other marketers around you in learning and understanding what's going on. And what I mean by that is like when I moved on from that property management regional role into more of the SaaS side of that, I was surrounded by a bunch of smart people that had different perspectives, but that was it, right? Like you're dependent on who's there to learn and understand what some of those things are. And so for me, I don't think I really understood right away how important it was to get as much qualitative feedback from customers and prospects as possible to then drive some of the decisions that you're making, especially when you're a little bit light on the experience. So what I mean by that is I think a lot of marketers, right, we take a lot of guesses, or we think this is going to work, or like we sort of say, hey, this sounds better, but does it? Like, does it actually speak to them like you want they want to be spoken to? Does it resonate? I think there's that void that exists, and I wish I would have found that earlier. I think if I could do anything, but I'm definitely like one of those believers of everything happens for a reason. I like to learn. Like I don't look at those as failures. I just look at them as this was an opportunity to learn, and this is what I did with it. But that's one of the things that sort of irks me if I could go back.
Let's shift gears to one last bit about AI here. You've probably been asked ad nauseum how you use ChatGPT and all this stuff. Kind of adjacent to that. Let's go a little bit deeper. What are the AI workflows in marketing that are like most worthwhile to you or you're most excited about?
Mm, workflows. I think for me, it's probably really on the brand side and things that I'm doing right now. What I mean by that is, yes, I use ChatGPT a lot. Use it every day, personal, professional. I found a lot of use cases. Too many to name here. But what I found fascinating, what was very interesting to me, was I'm a photographer as a hobbyist. I'd done it for a long time. When I had kids, some of those opportunities to take photos whenever I wanted or edit photos whenever I wanted just sort of went out the window, right? Time's a little bit hard to find. Um, I started experimenting with the text to image generation, right? So tools like Midjourney or Dolly. Think of for me, it was Midjourney. It was a lot of fun at first, right? It was like, hey, this is really cool. You create images with AI, right? And then it got to this point where the quality became so good that it's like, this makes sense in business. This now actually has value and utility in business. Right. And so one of the things that I really leaned into, especially as somebody that's got like this brand, content, photography, design background, was like, we've got an opportunity here in a niche where there's not a lot of photography. It takes us a long time to try to find stock photos that fit us or look like our style. We don't have the budget to be hiring a photographer every quarter for new shots and, wait around for the shots, blah, 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 blah. And so ultimately what that got me to was I can create on brand images with our ICP, with the age, with their ethnicity, what they wear, in the locations that they work, with our brand colors in my desk. And I can do that fast, and I can do that in perpetuity by basically finding prompt templates that I've used and discovered in that process and just run them over and over and over again. Right. And so what that allowed us to do was not only save time and money, like we don't have to go digging for this stuff. We can create this on brand library that's instantly accessible, but we shortcutted that to apply consistency across any channel that we wanted and took a huge piece of that puzzle and solved for it by saying, hey, look, like team, here's all of our assets. They're all in one place. We have hundreds of images now. You can use this for social, blog, ads, creative, slides, collateral, events, swag, right? And we did those things, right? And so, like, that was one of the things that I was involved in at LASSO probably at the beginning of Q2. And my eyes just sort of opened really wide because I was like, there is a huge opportunity here for us to solve a big, big pain point. And that was fascinating to me. And so if you're listening to this, right, I think you're probably in a camp where you either know stock photography sucks, it's painful, it takes a long time to do, brands are using the same images, they maybe don't fit your brand, um, or you've got sort of like a budget or a compromise issue, or you don't want to hire a photographer and fly them out to a location, blah, blah, blah. There's an opportunity here with AI to really solve these problems and stand out and do something different and appeal more to your target audience and your ICP and your end users by putting people that look and feel like them into the imagery, right? And making things more custom and more specific to them. So I think that's fascinating because as much as I love written content, visual content speaks faster. And I think it says a lot more. So um, I think that's a huge unlock that I think we're just starting to see. And that's sort of the precipice of why I started sort of the company I'm at right now.
Well, as we close out, let's give you a chance to talk about that. What you're doing now, where people can find you, kind of sign us off here.
Yeah, I mean, the best place to find me is on LinkedIn. I've been posting content on LinkedIn for over the last year and a half. It's been extremely rewarding for a number of reasons, the relationships, et cetera. So you can find me there. With the company that I have right now, it's called Brainchild, and essentially we solve that problem I just described. Right, like if you're a brand and you have no consistency, you want to have this sort of branded library approach. You want to start thinking about how you can speed up your process, save more time, and utilize AI. We can solve for that, right? Either in a deliverable format or a training format. And so that's sort of what I'm working with right now is really working with brands to say, hey, look, like, is your visual identity what you want it to be? Does it actually stand for the things that you want it to stand for? Does it properly represent you? Does it have the resonance with your audience? Because if not, there's never been a better time to solve it. So that's what I'm doing right now. And I'm working with, a number of different companies, right? Because a lot of businesses have this problem.